The starfield outside the main viewport was a silent, endless tapestry of black and silver. On the bridge of the Earth Defense Force cruiser Jeju, Captain Lee Daeyan allowed himself a quiet moment. The ship hummed around him, a sound so deep he felt it in his bones. His crew moved at their stations with soft voices and precise motions. It was a good crew. They were on the long, dull part of their patrol route, the edge of human-explored space where nothing much ever happened. "Captain," a voice broke the calm. It was Lieutenant Park Ji-woo. She was young for a major and pilot squadron leader, but her eyes held a sharpness that missed nothing. She stood beside the sensor station, her brow furrowed. "We're picking up a repeating signal on the fringe band. It's weak. It's not one of ours." Dae-hyun turned his chair. "Origin?" "Triangulating now, sir," the sensor officer said. A few taps later, a map glowed on the main screen. A red pulse blinked, far from any known shipping lane or colony. "It's a standard galactic distress pattern." "But the code?" "It's VEC." A low murmur traveled through the bridge. The VEC hegemony was not an enemy. Not officially. But they were not friends. They were a hard, proud species from a heavy-gravity world, all sharp angles and cold manners. Talks with them were slow and difficult. They saw the universe as a contest, and they believed they were meant to win it. "Put it through audio," Dae-hyun ordered. The bridge speakers crackled. A voice, translated by the ship's computer into stiff, formal Korean, filled the air. It was layered with static and something else, a raw, thin sound that might have been fear. "Catastrophic reactor failure. Stellar debris field. Primary life support failing. We are non-combatant civilians. 3 vessels. Estimated survivors, 1,200. We request. We begged for safe harbor. Any port, mercy." The message began to repeat. The word mercy hung in the air. Dae-hyun glanced to his right, where Ambassador Kwon Soo-min stood. The diplomat's face was a careful mask, but his lips were pressed into a thin line. "The VEC have a concept for mercy," Kwon said quietly, so only Dae-hyun could hear. "In their language, it translates closer to strategic pause. They do not see it as we do." "What do your protocols say, Ambassador?" Dae-hyun asked. Kwon sighed. "The Unified Earth Charter is very clear. Article 1. To render aid to any sapient beings in existential distress, regardless of origin or affiliation, is a primary moral duty. Our orders from command are to uphold the charter while on patrol." Dae-hyun nodded. He had expected that answer. He looked at the blinking red dot. 3 ships. 1,200 lives. Helm, plot an intercept course. Maximum sustainable speed. Communications, send a reply on the same frequency. Message. This is the EDF cruiser Jeju. We have received your distress call. We are en route to render assistance. Hold on. A message was sent. There was no immediate reply from the VEC, only the continued, desperate loop dot as the Jeju turned and its engines pushed them toward the signal. The ship moved from a routine patrol to a mission. The mood shifted. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Kim Yoon-ji called up everything the database had on Veek biology. The files were sparse. The VEC were secretive. She studied their respiratory needs, their common injuries. Her screen showed images of their tough, gray-hided bodies and their dark, multi-lensed eyes. They looked strong, but a failing ship did not care how strong you were dot in the main hangar. Sergeant Choi Min-soo inspected the marine dropships with his squad. He was a solid, practical man who had seen action on 2 colony moons. "Looks like we're on taxi duty, boys and girls," he said, slapping the hull of a craft. "We might need to bring some guests aboard if their ships are falling apart. Check all the environmental seals. And no, Private, That does not mean we get to try on their helmets if they have any. His squad laughed, the sound echoing in the large bay. It was a nervous laugh. They had all heard the stories about the Vec, but the sergeant's calm manner kept them focused on the job. On the bridge, Major Park Ji-woo returned to her station, her fingers dancing over her own console. She pulled up tactical overlays of the destination area. Her fighter pilots, the Ghosts, were on standby. She was not worried about the refugees. She was worried about what else might be out there. The fringe was empty, but it was not safe. She ran silent simulations, her mind already playing out scenarios where things went wrong. The journey took 18 hours. The distress signal grew stronger, more frantic. Finally, the long-range scanners painted a picture. It was a sad picture. 3 bulky, utilitarian Vec transport ships hung in the void. Their hulls were scarred black from radiation burns and micrometeorite impacts. One trailed a faint mist of frozen gases from a crack in its side. No weapon signatures. No energy shields. Just dying ships. "We are in visual range," the sensor officer said. "On screen," said Day-Hyan. The viewport's image enhanced. The ships looked even worse up close. Pitted metal, flickering lights from within. A new communication came in, video this time. The face that appeared on the screen was unmistakably Vec. The skin was like stone, the eyes deep set and glowing a faint amber. But the proud, rigid posture the Vec were known for was gone. This one seemed to sag. Its voice, when translated, was thick with exhaustion. "Human ship Jeju. We see you. Our gratitude. It is beyond words. Our engineers say the core containment on the lead ship will fail within 6 hours. We have many young and injured." Captain Day-Hyan leaned forward. "This is Captain Lee. We are here to help. Can your vessels still move on low thrust?" "Yes, but slowly. Very slowly." "Then form up behind us," Day-Hyan instructed, his voice steady and calm. "We will extend our navigational shield to cover you as much as possible. We are taking you to the Sirius neutral zone. It is the closest safe port. Our medical team is preparing to receive your injured. Do you understand?" The Vec on the screen bowed its head, a very human gesture of relief. "We understand. We will follow. Thank you." The connection closed. Day-Hyan turned to his crew. "You heard them. Let's get this convoy moving. Helm, take us in. Nice and easy. Shields to maximum extended coverage." The Jeju, a sleek blade of earth-made titanium and composite, moved gently toward the 3 wounded beasts. As it took its position ahead of them, a soft blue glow shimmered from its sides, expanding to envelop the front of the struggling Vec transports. The little convoy began to move, a snail's pace compared to the Jeju's normal speed, heading for the distant safety of the neutral zone. On the bridge, Ambassador Kwan watched the Vec ships on the screen. "They say thank you," he muttered, almost to himself. Dr. Kim, now on the bridge to consult, looked at the life sign readings from the transports. Their biosigns are weak. They have been suffering for a long time. That thank you. It was real. Major Park kept her eyes on her scanner, watching the empty space around them. It was all going smoothly. Too smoothly. Her instincts prickled. This was the fringe. Things were never this simple. Sergeant Choi and his Marines stood by in the hangar, waiting in case they were needed to help move people. They joked a little less now, seeing the state of the ships on their monitors. For 5 hours, they crept through the silent dark. The Jeju was a shepherd, its flock limping behind. Captain Day-Hyan allowed himself to feel a quiet pride. This was what they were meant to do. This was the principle that separated Earth from the stories of the old, warlike galaxies. Then the sensor alarm beeped, sharp and loud. Contact, Ji Woo said, her voice suddenly tight. Single vessel, bearing 321 Mark 10. It just appeared. Massive energy signature. It decloaked. A new ship blossomed on the tactical screen. It was larger than the Jeju. Its shape was aggressive, all jagged edges and spikes. Its hull was the color of dried blood. It moved between them and the path to the neutral zone, blocking their way. The identifier flashed on the screen. Translated by the computer dot, it was a Vec hegemony warship. The blade of supremacy. A hail came through immediately. The face that appeared was Vec, but unlike the broken refugee, this one sat upright in a command chair of black metal. Its eyes were not tired. They were pits of cold disdain. Human vessel, the voice boomed, the translation dripping with contempt. You are in possession of hegemony property. Divert your course and surrender the 3 transport ships to us immediately. The face on the screen was carved from the same gray stone as the refugees, but where theirs had shown cracks of desperation, this one was a perfect cold monument. Captain Lee Dae-hyun felt the temperature on the bridge drop several degrees. He kept his own face calm, a mask of polite attention. This is Captain Lee of the EDF cruiser JEJU, he said, his voice level. You are addressing a humanitarian mission. These vessels behind us are carrying non-combatant refugees. They are under the protection of Earth. The Vec commander did not blink. They are citizens of the hegemony. Their lives, their genetic material, are the property of the state. Their failure in the face of stellar catastrophe is a weakness. To flee is to steal from the strength of the whole. You will stand aside. From his place near the captain's chair, Ambassador Kwon Soo-min stepped forward. The diplomat's face was pale but set. He spoke clearly for the translation software. Commander, under interstellar convention, vessels in distress forfeit all claims of conflict. We are providing safe passage to a neutral zone. There is no theft here, only aid. We urge you to let us pass. A low, grating sound came from the speaker. It was the Vec equivalent of a derisive snort. Your conventions are the bleating of herd animals. Strength is the only convention. That which is weak does not deserve the resources it consumes. Those ships are weak. To aid them is to insult the strong. Final warning, divert your course. Dae-hyun's eyes flicked to his tactical screen. The blade of supremacy was powering its primary weapons. A red glow began to build at the tips of its spiked hull. He made a small, chopping motion with his hand behind his back, a silent order to his crew. All across the bridge, officers began activating systems with quiet urgency. Shields were shifted from extended coverage to forward reinforcement. Weapons consoles came to life. I cannot do that, Dae-hyun said, his tone final. These people are under our protection. You will not touch them. He turned his head slightly toward the comms officer. Open a channel to the refugee ships. Audio only. He waited for a subtle nod. Refugee convoy, this is Captain Lee. Accelerate to your maximum possible thrust. Move directly behind the Jeju. Use our hull as cover. Do it now. He heard a garbled, frightened acknowledgement from the Vec civilians. On the main screen, the Vec commander's eyes seemed to burn. A fatal error, human. You choose weakness. You will share its fate. The communication cut off. The screen returned to a view of the enemy warship, now glowing with menace against the starfield. He's targeting the convoy, Major Park Ji-woo announced, her voice tight. Her fingers were already flying over her console, sending launch codes. Not us, the lead refugee ship. All power to forward shields. Dae-hyun barked. Helm, bring us about 30 degrees to starboard. Put us directly in his firing line. Ji-woo, hit the ghosts out there now. disrupt his targeting, draw his fire. Alarms began to sound. A deep thrumming filled the ship as the Jeju's engines roared, swinging the massive cruiser sideways. Below, in the hangar bay, magnetic clamps released and the sleek, dagger-like forms of the ghost fighters shot into the blackness, trailing blue plasma. On the main viewer, they saw it happen. The blade of supremacy fired. It was not a single shot, but a coordinated broadside. Lances of searing green plasma, each thicker than a fighter craft, erupted from its hull. They streaked across the void, not toward the Jeju, but in a wide, calculated arc aimed at the three slow-moving, defenseless transports. The Jeju's expanded shield, now focused forward, flared a brilliant, desperate white as it intercepted the first two shots. The impact slammed through the ship. The deck pitched violently. Crew members were thrown against their harnesses. Warning lights exploded across every console, but the shield was overextended. It could not cover the entire convoy. The third and fourth plasma lances slipped past the shield's edge. They struck the lead, refugee ship. There was no sound in the vacuum. The visual was worse. The transport ship, already scarred and brittle, did not explode. It simply came apart. The green fire tore through its middle, vaporizing metal, atmosphere, and life. What was left was a silent, expanding cloud of glittering debris, lit from within by secondary explosions. The other two ships, untouched but trapped in the cloud of wreckage, drifted helplessly. On the bridge of the Jeju, time stopped. The tactical screens showed the catastrophic loss of life signs. 1,200 signals snuffed out in an instant. The only sounds were the blaring alarms and the shaky breaths of the crew. Captain Lee Dae-hyeon stared at the spreading debris field where a ship full of living beings had been 3 seconds before. The calm mask he wore shattered. His hands, resting on the arms of his command chair, clenched into fists so tight the knuckles turned bone white. A hot, red wave of pure fury washed over him, so intense it was dizzying. He saw Ambassador Kwan stumble back from the viewer, his hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with horror. He saw Dr. Kim Yoon-ji at her medical station, her face frozen in an expression of utter disbelief, as if her mind refused to process the data on her screen. Then Dae-hyeon's training reasserted itself, channeling the fury into a cold, sharp point. His voice, when it came, did not shout. It was low, flat, and carried across the silent bridge like a judge's sentence. All batteries, focus fire. Target their main weapon arrays and primary engine nacelles. I want that ship dead in the water. Major Park. Ji Woo's head snapped toward him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dark pools of the same fury. Ghost Squadron, Dae-hyeon said, meeting her gaze. Weapons free. Swarm them. Tear them apart. A feral, determined smile touched Ji Woo's lips for a fraction of a second. With pleasure, sir. She turned back to her console, her voice snapping over the fighter channel. All ghosts, this is Leader. The gloves are off. Pattern Delta on my mark. They just murdered civilians. Let's return the favor. Outside, the 8 ghost fighters, which had been weaving to distract, now formed into 2 tight arrowheads and screamed toward the blade of supremacy. They were tiny against the warship, but fast as angry hornets. The Jeju shuddered again as its own heavy railguns fired. Massive tungsten rounds, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, shot across the distance. They slammed into the Vec ship's shields, which flared a sickly orange dot. The Vec commander, perhaps expecting surrender or retreat, was slow to react. The ghosts were upon him. They streaked past his point defense lasers, launching volleys of seeking missiles and stitching his hull with rapid cannon fire. Explosions bloomed along one of the warship's weapon spines. The blade of supremacy began to turn. bringing its heavier batteries to bear on the Jeju. Green plasma shot past the cruiser's hull, close enough to light up the viewport. Evasive pattern echo. Daehayeon ordered. The Jeju rolled and dove, its own guns firing continuously down in the Marine barracks. Sergeant Choi Min-soo and his squad felt the impacts through the deck. The general alarm was blaring. Battle stations. All Marines, prepare for possible boarding action or damage control. Choi's voice was a steady roar in the chaotic room. He saw the same shock in his soldiers' eyes that had been on the bridge, but he met each gaze. They shot the people we were saving. Now they're trying to shoot us. So we're going to shoot back. Get to your posts. Move. The squad scattered, their fear hardening into a cold, focused anger. They had been ready to help carry the weak and injured. Now they readied themselves to kill. The battle was a brutal, close-range brawl. The Jeju was outgunned, but it was more agile, and its crew was fighting with a righteous, desperate rage. Park Ji-woo's ghosts made another pass, this time concentrating fire on the warship's main engine cluster. A chain of explosions whipped through the stern of the Blade of Supremacy. A vast plume of plasma and gas erupted into space. The warship's thrust died. It began to drift, a wounded beast. Direct hit on their primary drive. Ji-woo called out, triumph and venom in her voice. They're dead in the water. On the bridge, Daehayeon watched the crippled Vex ship. His fury had not cooled, but it had become a precise instrument. Cease fire on main batteries. Target their remaining weapon ports with point defense. I want them disarmed, not destroyed. Not yet. He took a long, slow breath, the first he felt he'd taken since the refugee ship died. The immediate fight was over. But as he looked at the wreckage of the convoy, mixing now with the debris from the Blade's injuries, he knew a much larger one had just begun. Silence reclaimed the bridge of the Jeju. It was a heavy, sick silence, broken only by the low beeping of consoles and the soft, strained breathing of the crew. The green fire was gone from the viewport, replaced by the ugly, drifting aftermath. The shattered remains of the Vec refugee ship tumbled slowly, a funeral shroud of metal and ice glittering in the light of a distant star. The other two transports huddled together behind the Jeju, silent and terrified. The Vec warship, the Blade of Supremacy, hung a few kilometers away. It was broken. Its drive section was a mangled ruin, venting a slow gray plume. Fire still glowed behind some of its viewports. It was no longer a threat. It was a crime scene. Captain Lee Dae-hyun unclenched his hands from the arms of his chair. His fingers ached. He could still see the image of the transport ship dissolving behind his eyelids every time he blinked. He pushed it down. There was work to do. Damage report, he said, his voice sounding rough, as if he hadn't used it in hours. Shields at 40%, an officer reported. Hull breaches on decks 7 and 9 contained. Minor fires in the port launch bay. 6 casualties reported, all minor. The ghosts are all accounted for. 1 fighter sustained damage, but is operational. Dae-hyun gave a single, sharp nod. They were lucky. He turned to Dr. Kim Yoon-ji, who was standing frozen at her medical station, her screen showing the flat lines where hundreds of Veek life signs had been. Dr. Kim, assemble a salvage and medical team. Take Sergeant Choi and a Marine detail for security. I want you to board the 2 remaining refugee ships. Treat their injured, assess their condition, and see if there is anything to recover from the wreckage of the first ship. Kim Eun-ji flinched at the last order, but she straightened her shoulders and nodded. The horror in her eyes was being pushed aside by a grim professional duty. Yes, Captain. Major Park, Dae-hyun continued. Keep 2 ghosts on patrol. The others are to stand down, but remain on high alert. I don't think our friend over there has any friends nearby, but I don't want surprises. Park Ji-woo was still staring at the wounded Vec warship on her screen, her jaw tight. She wanted to finish the job. She wanted to pour every last missile into its bridge. She tore her eyes away. Understood. Finally, Daehyun looked at Ambassador Kwon Soo-min. The diplomat was leaning against a console, his face ashen. Ambassador, with me. We have a message to send. In the captain's ready room, the quiet was even deeper. Daehyun activated a secure recording terminal. Kwon stood beside him, his hands trembling slightly until he clasped them together. What do we say? Kwon asked, his voice hollow. We show them, Daehyun said simply. His fingers moved over the console, pulling data files. He opened the bridge's visual and audio logs from the moment the blade decloaked. He spliced in the raw feed from the refugee ship's final seconds before its destruction, the terror in the Vec civilian's translated voice. He attached the sensor data, showing the warship's targeting solution clearly focused on the unarmed convoy, not the Jeju. He attached the medical scan Dr. Kim had taken earlier, showing the weak life signs of the refugees. He set the recording to play. The room filled again with the Vec commander's cold demands, Ambassador Kwon's pleading diplomacy, and then the silent, terrible flash that ended it all. When it finished, Daehyun leaned forward. The red light on the terminal glowed, indicating it was recording him now. This is Captain Lee Dae-hyun of the EDF cruiser Jeju, he began, his face a stone mask in the dim light. At 1437 Galactic Standard Time, a Vec hegemony warship, the Blade of Supremacy, deliberately and without provocation, destroyed a civilian vessel under our protection. The vessel was part of a humanitarian convoy carrying refugees from a stellar catastrophe. 1,200 lives were lost. He paused, his eyes like flint. They fired on a rescue convoy. They were told the ships were non-combatants. They were told the ships were under Earth's protection. They fired anyway. This is not an act of war. It is an act of extermination. There is no reasoning with this. There is no negotiating with this evil. He took a breath, the weight of the next words settling on him. I am therefore requesting, under Article 7 of the Earth Defense Charter, full wartime authority for this vessel and all fleet elements in this sector. The enemy is crippled but present. I will not let them escape to boast of this slaughter. I am pursuing immediate action. The attached data is the only evidence required. He stopped the recording. He didn't sign off with the usual formalities. He just looked at Kwon. Send it. Highest priority superluminal burst. Direct to Earth Command, with copies to every EDF vessel in a 10-sector radius. Kwon Soo-min had listened, and the color had slowly returned to his face, not from health, but from a building heat. The careful diplomat was gone. In his place was a man who had seen a fundamental truth violated. He nodded sharply. Send it. Out in the debris field, Sergeant Choi Min-soo led his Marines through the airlock of the second refugee ship. The interior was dark, cold, and smelled of fear and stale air. A dozen Vec civilians, their bodies looking even more gaunt and fragile up close, huddled together. They flinched when the humans entered, their multi-lensed eyes wide with a new terror. They had just seen their protectors attacked. They did not know what would happen next. Choi held up an empty hand, his weapon pointed at the deck. He slowly took off his helmet. His face was sweaty, but he tried to make it calm. Medical team, he called back. Dr. Kim and her nurses came through, carrying packs. One of the Vec, an older male with a deep cut across his arm, shrank back. Choi knelt down, keeping his movements slow. He pointed at the injury, then at Dr. Kim. Help, he said, the simple word feeling useless. Kim Yoon-ji moved forward, her medical scanner humming. She didn't flinch from the alien. She treated the wound with the same focused care she would give a human. The Vec watched, utterly confused. This was not the behavior of any species they understood. Meanwhile, in a small, shielded compartment on the ruined lidship's wreckage, a Marine found a blackened metal box. It was a data recorder built to survive catastrophe. He brought it back to the Jeju. Dr. Kim accessed it in the lab. It contained the final internal communications of the refugee ship. The voices were panicked, pleading. They held messages for loved ones on the Vec homeworld, praising the strange, soft humans who had come to save them. Then came the attack warning, the screaming, and the final deafening crash of the hull breaking apart. She listened to it all, tears of rage and grief cutting clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She made a copy and sent it straight to the bridge. On Earth, 8 hours later by faster-than-light communication. The message from the Jeju arrived. It exploded through the command structure like a plasma bolt. Admirals were roused from sleep. Politicians were called to emergency sessions. The raw, unedited data was played in the Unified Earth Council chamber. There was no debate. Not really. Some spoke of caution, of the need to understand. But then the black box recording from Dr. Kim was played. The sound of Vec civilians, in their last moments, expressing gratitude for human mercy, followed by their screams as they were murdered by their own kind. It extinguished any argument. Ambassador Kwon Soo-min, appearing via delayed transmission from the Jeju, was the final voice. His face was hard. All diplomacy burned away in the fire of the debris field. They did not attack soldiers, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. They attacked the very idea of mercy. They fired on compassion itself. To hesitate now is to tell the galaxy that our principles are just words. To delay is to desecrate the dead. The vote was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. A state of war existed between Earth and the Vec hegemony, effective immediately. Across the solar system, lights burned all night. Shipyards that built colony vessels switched to producing missile frigates. Freighters were repurposed as troop carriers. Reservists reported to bases, their faces set with grim determination. The orders went out not to mobilize for defense, but for immediate, relentless offensive action. Back on the fringe, Captain Dae-Hyeon had not waited for a reply. His request for wartime authority had been, in truth, a formality. As soon as the message was sent, he had ordered the Jeju to move. The ship, still scarred, positioned itself between the two surviving refugee ships and the crippled blade of supremacy. A new message, tight beam and unencrypted, was sent to the Vec warship. This is Captain Lee. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. You are prisoners of war, and you will answer for what you have done. The war had begun, not with a declaration from a capital world, but with a simple, awful fact in the cold dark of space. They had fired on a rescue convoy, and Earth, having seen the proof, was coming. The war did not start with a slow build-up. It started with a wave of cold, precise fury. Earth's fleets, scattered across several sectors, did not pull back to defend the home system. They turned as one and moved forward. The orders from command were not complicated. They were the echo of Captain Lee Dae-Hyeon's words. Find the Vec, hegemony's military assets, and break them. The strategy was different from anything the Vec had ever faced. It was a war of principle, and it was fought with a strange, double-edged blade. The first major engagement was at the Vec, outpost of Carad 7. It was a refueling station and a minor shipyard. A human task force, led by the battleship Soul, arrived. They did not open fire immediately. Instead, they broadcast a message on all frequencies, repeating it in both Korean and the Vec command tone. It showed the destruction of the refugee convoy, followed by clear, simple sentences. "We are here for your warships and your weapons. Stand down. Surrender. Civilian personnel will be spared. Harm will come only to those who fight." The VEC commander at Karad 7, a proud veteran, laughed. He ordered his 3 defense frigates to attack. The battle was short. The Soul and its escorts dismantled the frigates with terrifying efficiency. Then they focused their fire on the shipyard's weapon batteries and its command tower. They did not fire on the residential modules or the docks where unarmed freighters were tied up. When the VEC guns were silent, human shuttles descended. Marines in hard-shell armor, led by officers like Sergeant Choi Min-soo, stormed the broken command tower. They met resistance from VEC soldiers, who fought with a desperate, confused anger. They expected to be slaughtered. Instead, the humans used stun grenades and net guns where they could. They only used lethal force when directly fired upon. Choi himself wrestled a VEC trooper to the ground, disarmed him, and then, when the alien lay stunned, gestured for a medic to check the VEC's injuries before having him bound and led away. The VEC soldier stared, his understanding of the universe crumbling. Across the station, human medics set up aid stations. They treated wounded VEC soldiers alongside their own. They distributed emergency ration packs to the terrified VEC civilian workers who huddled in corners, expecting death. They offered water and basic medical care. The VEC civilians took the help with trembling hands, their eyes wide with a profound, unsettling confusion. This pattern repeated. At the supply depot of Gola Prime, human fighters crippled the defense grid, then broadcast offers of safe evacuation for all non-combatants. At the listening post in the Irax Belt, Major Park Ji-woo's Ghost Squadron, now assigned to the carrier Mount Pietu, disabled a VEC patrol. As the enemy fighters spun away, powerless, she saw one pilot eject in a life pod. The VEC command ship, fleeing, fired a missile back at its own pilot's pod to deny the humans a prisoner. Without hesitation, Ji-woo broke formation, dove through the debris field, and shot the VEC missile down. She then gently towed the life pod back to her carrier that her wingman questioned her over the comm. "Leader, was that worth the risk?" "It's just one VEC." Ji-woo watched the pod being pulled into the hangar bay on her screen. "They kill their own to prove a point," she said, her voice flat. "We save them to prove ours. We fight their navy. We do not murder their survivors." Back on the Jeju, which was now a mobile command center for the sector, the mood was different. The ship was repaired, but carried the scars. The crew worked with a quiet, intense focus. They had seen the crime. They were now instruments of the response. Dr. Kim Yoon-ji spent her time in 2 places. The first was the medical bay, where a dozen VEC prisoners from the Blade of Supremacy were held. Their commander was dead, killed in the fight. The survivors were mostly junior officers and crew. They were sullen, expecting torture and execution. Kim treated their wounds. She provided them with the same food the human crew ate. She offered them data slates with literature human stories about loss, about honor, about redemption. Most ignored them. One young VEC engineer, whose arm Kim had saved from infection, finally looked at her with his dark, multi-lensed eyes. "Why?" He asked, the word awkward in his throat. "You defeated us. We are weak. Why do you not take the reward of strength?" Kim put down her medical scanner. She thought of the black box recording of the thankful VEC voices. "Strength is not a reward you take from others," she said slowly, choosing simple words. "It is something you have inside. You use it to protect, not to destroy." The VEC engineer looked at his bandaged arm, then at the untouched food tray, then back at her. He said nothing more, but the rigid hate in his posture softened, replaced by a deep, Troubling thought. Captain Day Hyon watched the reports flood in from across the front. The Vec military was off balance. Their doctrine was simple: the strong conquer the weak. They expected humans to either be weak and run, or to be strong and commit total war, bombing their stations to dust. They did not know what to do with an enemy that was stronger, but whose strength included mercy. It was a tactical weapon they had no defense against. Ambassador Quan, now acting as a political advisor to the fleet, reviewed intercepted Vec communications. The confusion was spreading. A transmission from a Vec captain at the Battle of Gola Prime was particularly telling. The humans crippled our engines, then asked if we required medical assistance. They targeted our weapons with surgical strikes, but left our crew modules intact. Is this a trick? What is their objective? Another, from a low-level bureaucrat on a captured station, whispered, "The humans gave my child a nutrient bar. They called her Little One. The soldiers who did this were the same ones who shattered our defense gate. I do not understand." Quan showed the transcripts to Daehyun. "It's working," Quan said, a hard light in his eyes. "They can't process it. Their whole society is built on a pyramid of strength. We just showed them a different kind of pyramid, and they don't know where they stand on it." Daehyun nodded, looking at the star map. The human advance was steady. They understand force. We have shown them that. Now we are showing them that force has a purpose beyond conquest. It is to enforce a rule. The rule is, you do not fire on rescue convoys. You do not murder the helpless. And if you do, the consequences will be absolute, and they will be just. He leaned forward, plotting the next move. The intelligence pointed to a major Vec fleet gathering at the border world of Carid. It was a fortress world, well defended. It would be the toughest fight yet. They will make their stand there, Daehyun said. They will throw everything they have left at us. To prove their strength is the real kind. And we will show them, Quan said. That strength without a heart is just noise before the silence. On the bridge, the crew prepared for the jump to Carid. There was no boasting, no loud speeches, just the quiet certainty of people who knew exactly why they were fighting, and who knew their enemy was already half defeated, not by weapons, but by an idea he could not comprehend. The star system called Carad was not beautiful. It was a place of sharp edges and hard light, a red dwarf star casting a bloody glow on a cluster of rocky worlds. The third planet, Karad Prime, was the Vex fortress. Orbiting it was the largest hegemony fleet ever assembled by human eyes. Dozens of warships, from swift frigates to hulking battle carriers, formed a jagged wall of dark metal between the planet and the incoming humans. It was a display meant to scream strength, to finally crush the confusing, principled enemy that had torn through their border. On the bridge of the Jeju, now the flagship of the human armada, Captain Li Dixian studied the tactical display. It was a formidable sight, but he did not see an unstoppable wall. He saw a last, desperate argument made by a bully who only knew one language. They're in a classic defensive formation, Major Park Ji-woo said from her station, her voice calm. They're daring us to charge. They want a straight fight, ship to ship, strength to strength. That is not the fight they will get, Daehyun replied. He turned to communications. Open a fleet-wide channel and broadcast this on every Vec frequency you can find. Civilian, military, all of them. He waited for the nod. The bridge crew watched him. He did not stand to give a grand speech. He spoke sitting in his chair, his voice clear and steady, meant not for his crew, but for the enemy. Vec hegemony. This is Captain Lei Daehyun of the Earth Defense Force. You are gathered here to make a final stand. You believe this is a war of strength. You are wrong. On every Vec ship, On every screen in the homes and factories of Karad Prime, his face appeared. Then the screen split. On one side was the footage they had seen before, the blade of supremacy firing, the refugee ship dissolving into fire. But on the other side, new footage played. It showed human medics bandaging Vec soldiers on Karad 7. It showed Sergeant Choi Min-soo handing a canteen to a parched Vec worker. It showed Major Park Ji-woo's fighter towing the Vec life pod to safety. It showed Dr. Kim Yoon-ji carefully setting a Vec child's broken arm. "You fired on a rescue convoy." Dai Hyen's voice continued over the images. "You declared that mercy was a weakness to be destroyed. We declared that mercy is a strength to be defended. You have seen our strength in battle. Now look at what it protects. Look at what your strength has destroyed." The footage ended, leaving only his stern face. "This ends now. You will power down your weapons and your drives. You will surrender your fleet. You will do this not because we are stronger in war, but because you are weaker in spirit. You have nothing left to fight for. We fight for every life you would throw away. Stand down. This is your only warning." The channel closed. For a long moment, there was nothing. The massive Vik fleet hung in space, silent. Then, chaos erupted. But not the chaos of battle. On the human sensors, they saw it. A third of the Vec ships suddenly went dark, their weapon systems powering off. A few even began to slowly turn away, moving out of formation. Angry, frantic Vec communications, no longer encrypted, blared across the open spectrum. "Traitors. Weaklings. Obey the order to attack." One voice, likely a senior commander, screamed, "Destroy the cowards who break formation." A Vec battle carrier, loyal to the old way, turned its guns not on the humans, but on a smaller frigate that was powering down. It fired. The frigate's hull erupted. Captain Daehyun saw his opening. "All units," he said, his voice cutting through the tension on his own bridge. "Execute Plan Sentinel. Target only the ships that remain hostile. Avoid all vessels showing neutral or friendly signals. Ghost Squadron, you have the lead. Surgical strike on the command carrier." The human fleet, which had been holding position, moved. It was not a wild charge. It was a precise, relentless advance. The Vec line was no longer a wall. It was a fractured mess, ships fighting each other as much as the humans. Park Gi-woo led her ghosts in a weaving, terrifying dance through the chaos. They ignored the Vec ships that had shut down. They flew straight for the massive command carrier that had fired on its own ally. Its point defense lasers lit up, trying to swat them away. But the confusion was its downfall. Ji-woo locked on and fired a spread of armor-piercing torpedoes. They streaked past the dying frigate and slammed into the carrier's bridge tower. A series of fireballs blew out its side. The great ship began to list, dead. With its heart cut out, the remaining hostile Vec resistance crumbled. Some fought to the end, destroyed by focused human fire. Most, seeing the command ship die, and the humans systematically sparing those who yielded, surrendered. Their weapons went dark. Their drives powered off. The battle for Karad was over in less than an hour. The human fleet now held the space around the planet, its guns silent, watching over a defeated enemy. The real work began. Sergeant Choi Min-soo and thousands of Marines like him boarded the surrendered Vec ships. They met little resistance. The Vec crews stood in sullen, shocked silence. They were disarmed and gathered in their own mess halls, under guard. But the orders were strict. No violence unless attacked. Provide food and water. Treat injuries. On the planet below, diplomatic shuttles landed. Ambassador Kwon Soo-min stepped out, wearing a simple uniform, not ceremonial robes. He met with the stunned Vec planetary governor. The terms were not of pillage or occupation. They were simple disarmament, the dissolution of the hegemony's military command, the establishment of a neutral zone, and one non-negotiable point, the adoption of a new interstellar law written around the incident that started the war. The Convoy Clause. Never again. Back on the Jeju, in the quiet of the captain's ready room, Daehyun stood with Kwon, looking at the planet below. The red sun was setting on a new era. It was never about being fiercer than them, Daehyun said, his voice tired but clear. Anyone can be fierce. It was about being so certain of what we are that they broke against it. Their whole idea of the universe broke. Kwon nodded. They thought our mercy made us weak. They fired on it to prove their point. And in doing so, they proved ours. In the medical bay, Dr. Kim Yoon-ji checked on the Vec engineer from the Blade of Supremacy. He was being prepared for transfer with the other prisoners. He looked at her. "You won," he stated. "No one won today," Kim said softly. "Too many are dead. But maybe we stopped losing." She handed him a small data chip. "It's a copy of the recordings from your people's refugee ship, the ones who were thankful, and the ones from our black box. So you remember what was really lost, and why." The Vec took the chip, his hard face unreadable. But he closed his hand around it tightly. On the bridge, Major Park Ji-woo watched her fighter pilots return. They were quiet. The easy excitement of victory wasn't there. They had done a hard, necessary thing. She looked out at the silent Vec fleet, now being shepherded by human tenders. Sergeant Choi reported from a captured Vec destroyer. "Ship is secure, Captain. Crew is compliant." A few asked. They asked if we were going to kill them now. He paused. Told them no. Told them the war is over. They didn't seem to know what to do with that. Across the galaxy, the story spread. Not as a story of human conquest, but as a story of human conviction. They had not sought a war, but when a line was crossed, they did not hesitate. They went to war, not for land or resources, but to prove a single uncheckable point, that some lines cannot be crossed, and that a strength which includes compassion is an unstoppable force. The Jeju turned for home, its crew forever changed. Behind them, they left a changed galaxy, one that had learned, in fire and in mercy, what happens when you fire on a rescue convoy.